You clicked this video, didn't you? Perhaps you're sitting in a crowded subway, or lying in a bed you don't want to leave, or maybe you're just killing time between tasks at a job that makes you feel like a ghost. You're looking for the secret. You've convinced yourself that at 99 years old, some mystical vault opens inside a man's mind, revealing a golden key labeled the meaning of life. You stare at the age spots on my hands, listen to the gravel in my voice, and you wait for a miracle. But let me douse you with a bucket of cold reality right now. There is no miracle. There is only biology, a lot of luck, and what you choose to do with the clock while it's still ticking. Your greatest tragedy isn't that life is short, it's that you live as if it were infinite. You've turned your entire existence into a waiting room. You sit there for decades. You wait for the weekend. You wait for the summer. You wait for the kids to finish school, then college, then find a good job. You wait for the mortgage to be paid, for the promotion, for the day you finally lose those 10 pounds. You wait for a better time, a right sign, a nod from the universe. But do you know what the waiting room really is? It's a place where souls turn gray. It smells like dust and unwashed coffee cups. It's filled with people holding tickets for a number that will never be called. I've seen thousands of them die in that room, still clutching their plans for one day. They saved the best china for a special occasion that never came. They kept the good wine until it turned to vinegar. At 99, I've realized that the special occasion is the very moment you draw a breath. If you can't find a spark of joy in the middle of a traffic jam, or in a rainy Monday, or in a pile of dirty dishes, you won't find it on a beach in Bali either. You'll just be a miserable person with a better view. Stop preparing to live. Start consuming life, greedily, even the parts that taste like ash. Because there is no second seating. You worrying about inflation. You stress over the price of a subscription or the cost of a fancy latte. Let me drag you back to 1929. I was 6 years old. The world didn't just change. It disintegrated. My father was a master carpenter. I can still smell the sawdust on his skin, a mixture of pine, sweat, and the pride of a man who built things to last. He built houses where families were supposed to grow old. Then, the stock market crashed, and the hammers fell silent. I watched my father, a giant who could lift a timber beam alone, begin to shrink. Shame is an acid that dissolves a man faster than any disease. He would leave every morning in a clean shirt and return after 10 hours of searching for work, his eyes hollow. I remember the soup-lined miles of gray coats and downcast eyes. We didn't have shoes. My mother would wrap our feet in burlap sacks, and we'd stuff newspapers into the holes of old boots to keep the frostbite at bay. But my father never let us whine. He would say, "Henry, they can take your house, they can take the car, they can even take the dinner off your plate. No one can take your dignity unless you hand it over." One evening, he came home covered in coal dust. He had spent 14 hours shoveling for a few cents. He laid a single loaf of bread on the table. It was hard as a stone. He took a knife and sliced it with the precision of a jeweler cutting a diamond. He took the smallest crust for himself. We ate that bread in a silence so thick you could feel it. I have never, in all my 99 years, tasted anything more delicious. It taught me that stuff is just noise. Wealth isn't about the balance in your bank account. It's about the strength of your spine when you have nothing left but your name. By 1941, I was 18. I thought the world was finally opening up. I had a job at the steel mill. I was earning my first real wages, and I was head over heels for a girl named Marie, who worked at the local library. We talked about buying a Ford and driving until we hit the Atlantic. We thought the war was a story for other people, something that happened in distant lands to strangers. Then came December, and the horizon turned black dot suddenly. I wasn't Henry the carpenter's son anymore. I was a serial number on a cold piece of metal. They loaded us onto trains like cattle. You've seen the movies with the brass bands and the girls kissing soldiers at the station. That lasts 5 minutes. The rest is the smell of rust, diesel, unwashed bodies, and wet iron. War isn't a symphony. It's a roar that makes your teeth vibrate in your skull. I was sent to the Pacific. There, life was stripped down to the bone. No romance, just sand that got into everything and the constant, rhythmic whistle of incoming shells, the sound of death asking a question. I watched boys I'd played cards with just an hour before turn into ghosts in a heartbeat. When you see life snuffed out like a candle in a gale, you realize that life isn't fair. It isn't logical. It doesn't owe you a happy ending or a gold watch at 65. Peace isn't a given. It's a miracle. If you can sit in a room right now where nothing is exploding, where you have a glass of water and the freedom to complain about the weather, you are richer than any king I ever knew. After 1945, Those of us who came back were like wounded animals looking for a burrow. We didn't want glory. We wanted silence. I returned to Ohio, back to the steel mill, that same hell of molten metal and screaming sirens, but now that steel was going into rails for new cities, not tanks for old battlefields. Then, I found my Marie again. She was still at the library, her glasses sliding down her nose just like I remembered. I went there every single day, pretending to be deeply interested in classical literature I couldn't understand, just to see her smile. We married in '48. It was the era you see on the postcards now: white picket fences, the smell of fresh-cut grass on Saturday mornings, and kids chasing each other on bicycles. We bought a small, humble house on Elm Street. I painted every single board by hand. I believed I had built a fortress that no storm could touch. We had 3 children: Tommy, Sarah, and little Mikey. Between 1948 and 1957, I was convinced I had outsmarted fate. I'd survived the Great Depression, I'd survived the Pacific, and now life was finally paying me dividends. This was my biggest mistake, believing I had control. You today are obsessed with control. You track your steps, your calories, your stock market trends. You plan your careers 20 years into the future. You build your crystal castles out of plans and expectations. But listen to an old man. Life is not an accounting ledger where the debits must always match the credits. Life is a chaotic tide that occasionally lets you rest on a quiet shore. Enjoy your stability while it lasts, but never make it your religion, because when the idol of security falls, it crushes you with the weight of its own lies. November 14, 1957. A Tuesday. Just a regular, boring Tuesday. It was raining, a cold, gray drizzle that soaked into your bones. Marie needed to go to the pharmacy to get a cough syrup for little Mikey. She kissed my cheek and said, "I'll be quick, Henry. Don't let the kids eat all the pie before I get back." Those were her last words. A drunk driver in a heavy pickup truck simply blew through a stop sign. Death wasn't heroic. It was senseless, dirty, and instantaneous. I was 34 years old. In one single second, my fortress on Elm Street became a vault. Do you know what grief smells like? It smells of ozone, cold rain on wool, and the metallic tang of a hospital waiting room. The worst part was the sound of the house at night. You never realize how much noise a person makes until they are gone. The creak of a floorboard, the rustle of a turning page, her quiet humming in the kitchen, all of it was replaced by a silence so heavy it felt like it was crushing my ribs. I broke. I started drinking whiskey as if it were oxygen. I went to work, I moved like an automaton, but inside, I was dead. I hated the world for continuing to turn. How could people laugh? How could the sun dare to shine? I became a ghost in my own home, and my children looked at me with terror because their father had turned into a pillar of ice. Then one night, Mikey, the one she'd gone to get medicine for, walked into the room. He was clutching his teddy bear and he whispered, "Daddy, are you going to leave us too?" That was my wake-up call. Pain is the price of love, and you must pay it. But misery is a voluntary prison. I poured the bottle down the sink that night and chose to breathe again, not for myself, but for them. For the next 25 years, I gave my life to steel. I became a foreman at the mill. My life was dictated by whistles. Wake up at 5 a.m., the smell of grease and hot iron, the roar of the furnaces, home, children's homework, sleep. I identified myself entirely by my job. I was Henri the steelman. My worth was measured in tons of production and the reliability of the check I brought home every 2 weeks. I thought that was the meaning of a man's life, to be a rock that never shakes. Then came 1982. What they later called the Rust Belt began to rot. The mills started closing one by one. Globalization, shifting economies to the big bosses in skyscrapers. We were just lines of expenditure that needed to be cut. I was 60 years old. One morning, they simply told us, "Thank you for your service, hand in your badges." 40 years of my identity were tossed into a dumpster in 10 minutes. I saw many of my friends die within 2 years of that day. Not from illness, but from uselessness. When you take away a man's utility, he often turns to ash. I sat on this very porch for weeks, looking at my hands that were used to levers and fire, and now they were empty. I felt like scrap metal. But then I remembered 1957. I remembered that I am not my hard hat. I started woodworking in the garage. I started growing the flowers Marie loved. I realized that for 40 years, I had been building someone else's empire while forgetting to inhabit my own soul. You young people today are so afraid of being irrelevant or losing your status. But listen, Your job is just a way to pay the bills. Your meaning is found in the silence of your garage, in the way you look at a piece of wood, in the way you learn to be a person when the world tells you you're done. By the time I turned 74, I was preparing for the final act. I was the quiet widower of Elm Street. My garden was perfect, my children had children of their own, and I thought my role in this play was coming to an end. I was waiting for the sunset, but fate, that old trickster, had other plans. It pulled up to my driveway in a bright red 1990s convertible. At the wheel was Rose. She was 68. She wore enormous purple hats that would look ridiculous on anyone else, and she painted what she called expressionism, but what I called accidental paint spills. She was twice divorced. Loud, and nothing like Marie. She was a storm that blew into my sterile peace. The neighbors, those guardians of morality in our little town, began to whisper. My daughter Sarah, always so proper, came to me with a grave face. Dad, this looks ... inappropriate. What will people say? You're over 70. It's time to think about the eternal, not trips in a convertible with a woman in leopard print leggings. I looked at my daughter and felt that old steel hardness return. I said, Sarah, I gave 40 years to grief. I paid my debt to memory to the very last cent. I've been the perfect father, the perfect widower, the perfect neighbor, but now I want to be just Henri. If God gives me a chance to feel the warmth of someone's hand, the scent of perfume, and the wind in my hair before I go blind, I'm not going to ask permission from Mrs. Johnson or you. We spent 21 years together. We bought an old RV and drove through every state. We ate bagels in New York at 3 a.m. We listened to jazz in New Orleans standing in a crowd where we were the oldest but the happiest. She taught me that life has no expiration date for love. Social norms are just paper walls you build around yourself. Don't be afraid to be inappropriate. Late is when they close the coffin lid. Everything else is time to hit the gas. Today, I am alone again. Rose left 5 years ago. She went with a smile, holding my hand, and said, Henri, don't you dare mourn too long. You still have things to do. My legs barely obey me, my eyes see through a fog, and my friends are now just names on granite slabs. You might think I'm lonely and miserable. But you're wrong. I'm happier than I was in my 30s. Why? Because I finally learned to split life into atoms. You young people are chasing the Big Bang. You wait for the wedding, for the $1 million, for the world recognition. You think happiness is a giant cake waiting at the end of the road. It's not. Happiness is crumbs. Thousands of tiny crumbs scattered throughout your day. If you don't learn to pick them up, you'll die of hunger while sitting on a golden throne. I call them micro joys. Every morning, I take inventory. I feel the hot coffee warming my throat. That's the first joy. I watch a ray of sunlight up dust motes in the air, and they dance like tiny galaxies. That's the second joy. I hear a neighbor's child laughing outside. That's the third joy. If you can't find ecstasy in the taste of a ripe peach or the smell of clean laundry, you are a poor person, poorer than a beggar. Your brain is a tool you've tuned to search for problems. Try retuning it to search for molecules of beauty. Train your gratitude like you train your muscles in the gym. If you can't be happy in a supermarket line, you won't be happy on a yacht in Monaco. You'll just be the same anxious person with a better view. Soon, my journey will end. I can already see the shore. I'm not afraid because I've used every gram of my fuel. I'm not leaving any unlived life behind. My tank is empty, and that's the best way to go. But you who are watching me right now through a screen, you still have full tanks, and it terrifies me how you waste them. You're afraid to be real. You're afraid of being judged by people whose names you won't even remember in a year. You stay at a job you hate to buy things you don't need. You're afraid to say I love you first. You're afraid of looking stupid. Listen to old Henri. Being stupid is the privilege of the living. Being vulnerable is the only way to be real. My last order to you: wake up. Stop being zombies consuming someone else's content. Create your own content to your own life. Hug your parents while they still have a scent, not just memories. Kiss your spouse as if the world ends in 5 minutes. Eat the damn cake. Go on that trip, even if you don't have money for a hotel. Sleep in the car, but look at the stars. Life isn't an exam where you get grades for being correct. It's a song. And it doesn't matter if you hit the notes. It only matters how loudly and sincerely you sing it. I've lost everything a man can lose. But if I were offered to do it again, to go through all the pain, the cold, and the loss just to taste an apple and hear Rose laugh one more time, I would do it in a heartbeat. Now, turn off this video. Don't watch the next one. Go outside. Breathe. Feel your lungs fill with life. That is the miracle. Now, get off my porch. Go and live.